Welcome to the USAGSO West Pacific Overseas Committee Treasurer Orientation. The OC Treasurer is one of the 4 required positions of an Overseas Committee Management Team, or otherwise known as the OCMT. Good financial procedures are essential for an Overseas Committee to be an approved installation private organization, as well as to be compliant with the USAGSO West Pacific standards of being an Overseas Committee. This webinar is meant to be a supplement to the Overseas Treasurer's Guide found in the Overseas Committee Management Team binder or the Dropbox link available from your Overseas Committee chair. In this webinar, we will cover the following: job description in the Treasurer's Guide, account management, cash received and cash disbursements, checking accounts, financial reports, rollover funds, end of the fiscal year, budget, and the audit. On the screen now, you see the volunteer position description. As you can see, the term expires May 31st of each year and may be reappointed, and is appointed by and accountable to the Overseas Committee Chair. Now, the purpose of this position is to ensure that sound financial practices are carried out by the Overseas Committee and by the troops. Here we have several accountabilities. I'm just going to point out a few. As the Treasurer, you're to maintain accurate, up-to-date Overseas Committee financial records, including the Troop and Overseas Committee accounts. You'll also report the financial status of the committee in written statements to the entire Overseas Committee, usually written monthly statements to the Overseas Committee and the leaders. You'll also submit an end-of-the-year financial report to the Overseas Committee, as well as USAGSO West Pacific headquarters located on Camp Sama. With the Overseas Committee Chair, you'll secure an auditor for each fiscal year and assist the auditor with verifying financial records. And then you'll also attend regularly scheduled meetings of the Overseas Committee. Inside of the Overseas Committee Management Team binder, as well as on our Dropbox link, there is a Treasurer Guide for your position. The purpose of this guide is to describe the methods and procedures to control and account for all the funds of the USAGSO Committee, and if applicable, the following appropriate military regulations for your installation. The Treasurer is also responsible for all financial records concerning their USA Girl Scout West Pacific Overseas Committee, and the Treasurer will operate within the guidelines of the guide and, if applicable, the appropriate military regulations for their installation. Now, as a Treasurer, of course, you'll have account management. So there's a couple of things that you'll need to know. For all overseas accounts, the listing of the name should be on your records, USA Girl Scout Overseas, and then you insert your committee name. So this is important for your checking account. So for example, for the Cherry Blossom Committee, they would list things USA Girl Scout Overseas - Cherry Blossom Committee. Now when it asks for the taxpayer ID, you would list 13-1624016. Now on your account, you need to have 3 authorized signers, 2 of which are the Overseas Committee Chair and you as the Treasurer. The 3rd signer can be either the cookie manager, secretary, or registrar. Now, each financial institution has its own guidelines and regulations. In addition, most U.S. military installations regulate bank accounts for the private organization. So please check with your local private organization office as to what the protocol must be followed in your area. And if you have any questions, please discuss this with your Overseas Committee Chair. Now on the screen is a letter of authorization for private orgs to have a single bank account. For Girl Scouts on their installations, many of the banks require this letter, or your private org office will require a copy also of this letter. Now, this authorization letter is typically good for 3 years, but it is good practice to check with your installation or private work office to see if you'll need any additional information and required for your authorization letter for banking on your installation. Also, as part of being a treasurer, we do have a form that must be submitted with your paperwork that's due on September 15th. This is your account profile form. This form has, of course, where it asks your overseas committee name, the financial institution that you are currently banking with, and various other information. Again, you will turn in this form by September 15th with your plan of work, constitution, bylaws, and budget that your overseas committee chair will be collecting. Now, as a treasurer, we have to, of course, talk about the general accounts ledgers. So setting up your general ledger. The general ledger contains listing or line items for each source of income and expense. Also has sub-accounts for troops, are kept as separate ledger, and the amounts listed are reflected in the general ledger. The ledger can be created in Word, Excel, or you may use accounting software such as Quicken or QuickBooks or ScoutMate. The ledger must be balanced monthly with the bank statement and your check register. So here on the screen is a sample of a general accounts ledger. As you see, we have several columns: your date, line item, your voucher number, transaction, income, expenses, and balance. So here you'll see where they started January 5th, 2013. They're doing the balance forward. So you can see it's $1,000. And as you go on, we have product sales. So you have income from cookies. So the balance is increasing. But then you have to pay for the cookies. So there's an expense. So the balance decreased. We also, again, have sub-account ledgers. So they must include an account for the overseas committee, an account for each of your troops, and combine these accounts equal the general ledger. The general ledger balance must match the total of the balances in all of your ledger accounts. So here we go. We see again, we have our balance forward, and then we have our product sales. So for this one, we have where we had $900 that's being transferred to a troop account. So the corresponding line item should be recorded on the sub-account ledger to show an income of $900 that was moving for troop 111. As treasurer, you're also going to be collecting the dues, and you may have family partnership and donation amounts that are coming in through the membership forms. So here we go. As membership dues and contributions are collected, the troops and the OCs, checks should be made payable to your overseas committee. Then the overseas committee treasurer will write one check to cover all the expenses, such as membership dues, fair share, or contributions. Now, please itemize what exactly the payment is covering. Now, the check is made payable to USAGSO West Pacific and needs to be sent with each batch of your membership registrations that are mailed. So again, as you're getting all these registrations that are coming in for your new members and your returning members, you may see where people have donated money. There may be fair share. They're going to come in with different checks. So all those checks are going to be deposited in the one account, and then as a treasurer, you will have one check that goes with all the registrations that your overseas committee registrar will mail to headquarters. Now, there will be troop and overseas committee expenses and deposits. So as each troop leader or overseas committee member comes to you to perform a transaction, maybe advances, deposits, or expenses, they will bring with them a completed, filled out cash advance deposit expense voucher, which we'll take a look at a little later. So let's first talk about these pieces. You have cash advances. They're used for the following two reasons. Proceeds from cookie sales are not available to the troop yet, or leaders may not have personal funds to purchase their troop supplies for which they are later reimbursed. Now, it's very important. The overseas committee should never deplete its funds. In other words, you're not giving all your money out to where you're done. It needs to be in the position of needing advances, and it never needs to be in a position of needing to advance itself troop funds. As an overseas committee treasurer, you always want to make sure you are operating in the black. You're never in the negative. So, as cash is received, all cash received shall have a receipt. One copy of the receipt, dated and signed by the appropriate receiver of cash, will be given to the person that's turning in the money. The second copy will be attached to the bank deposit slip after money is deposited in the overseas bank account. The deposit is recorded in the Overseas Committee General Ledger in the appropriate column. Now, as for cash disbursements, all disbursements will be made by check or petty cash. Checks written in payment for services or for goods are to be signed by both the treasurer and the Overseas Committee chair. All checks written are to be supported with a valid receipt or vendor invoices. All receipts need to be turned into the treasurer within 21 days of transaction. All checks written are recorded in the Overseas Committee General Ledger in the appropriate column, including the check number, date, person or vendor, and a description of the expense and the amount. Now, vouchers. We mentioned that earlier. So vouchers create your paper trail. Each transaction needs a voucher and corresponding documentation. Documentation includes store receipts or vendor invoices for expensive and bank deposit slips for income. The voucher must be a duplicate and signed by the treasurer and the person making the transaction. So here is that cash advance deposit expense voucher. You see it has all the information that you need to have with your records to include, as it says, that paper trail. So here you have your date, the item description. It asks them to please check the appropriate transaction and then what the amount is. And then you have the bottom, which is your office use. So you'll have your amount deposited, the balance that's remaining in that troop or the OC's fund, because you want to, again, have that running total. And then it has the signatures. And for this, you'll have an NCR copy, that carbon copy, so you'll have a white copy and a yellow copy. So we send these forms per request by the Overseas Committee Treasurer or the Chair. So we will send you a stack of forms. There's also a hard copy form that is just in regular copy paper that is in your binder, or you can download it off the Dropbox link. And then you can just have 2 copies that people will sign and fill out. Now, we talked about our vouchers, cash advances, and we mentioned petty cash earlier. So a petty cash fund with the suggested amount of $100 may be kept for minor expenses. All other expenses are paid with a check. The responsibility for the petty cash is vested in the treasurer. So the petty cash fund may be replenished as often as necessary during the month, and a check is issued to the Overseas Committee designee and petty cash is replenished. Now, the treasurer will post the various expenses to the appropriate account in the Overseas Committee budget, and all expenses from petty cash must be supported with a receipt. Again, it's very important, the receipts. You need to have your paper trail so you have everything in place when you can do your year-end audit. So as for the checking account, a checking account will be maintained in a military banking facility or appropriate civilian bank that's on your installation. Troops may not have individual bank accounts. Remember, they are part of your ledger. They're a line item. They do not have their own bank account or checking account. Bank statements will be mailed to the Overseas Committee Chair or Treasurer using the Overseas Committee's mailing address by the bank each month. The monthly bank statements will be reconciled with a checkbook balance within 10 days. Your checkbook, all checks require at least 2 signatures from an authorized signer on the account. For deposits, all money collected will be deposited into the Overseas Committee checking account. The deposit slip must be attached to a voucher identifying where the money comes from, and all deposit slips will be kept and later stapled to the corresponding bank statement when reconciled. Overseas committees may not have debit cards nor credit cards. Financial reports. Now, a full financial report should be prepared at least quarterly from the entries in the checkbooks. The treasurer reports the income and expenses for the period to the Overseas Committee during a regular Overseas Committee meeting. As you remember, that is part of the accountabilities on your position description. Monthly financial reports will reflect monthly income and expenses and balance of the Overseas Committee and troop group accounts. Now, the Treasury Report becomes part of the official minutes of the Overseas Committee meeting and is filed with the reconciled bank statements. The Treasury Report will be compared monthly with the annual approved Overseas Committee budget. Now, for those overseas committees operating on U.S. military installation, financial statements may be needed to be submitted quarterly to your private organization office. To know if that is part of your installations processes, you would contact your private organization office, or you can double check as well with your Overseas Committee chair. Now here on the screen is a sample of a treasurer's monthly reports. You'll see it has the date, the balance forward, any income that's coming in, any expenses that are coming in, the balances that are on hand, and it says what those balances are comprised of. You see again where it has each troop, as they have income and expenses, they have their own line. We also have something that's known as the Troop Rollover Fund. Now, troop accounts are generally closed after receiving the year-end finance and inventory report in order to ensure that the girls who participated in the Girl Scout money earning activities that year with their troop are able to participate in activities they voted on. Now, however, there are times when a troop or group may have a long-term goal that requires more financial planning, such as they may be traveling to another country, or they're having a large-scale service project, such as their gold award, their silver award, or maybe they're doing a community project within their installation that's taking 2 years for it to plan for. So troops may submit a troop rollover application to their Overseas Committee Management Team. The Overseas Committee Management Team makes a decision based on the best interests of the majority of the girls in the troop and group. Now, troops may also use the Troop Rollover Fund to request funding for summer activities. The Overseas Committee Management Team makes a decision based on the best interests of the majority of the girls in the troop, and rollover funds for summer activities are by reimbursement only. So here is the Troop Rollover Fund application. It has a general description of exactly what it is so your troop leaders can read this over, and then it has guidelines. There are 6 different guidelines that are very important for you to understand. So number 1, troops who wish to apply for rollover funds must provide a complete timeline and a budget for the project or activity they wish to roll over their funds for. So this must be attached to this application when they're turning in. Number 2, troops must apply for rollover funds by April 1st for the following year. So they need to have this by April 1st so that you have everything in order as you're doing the year-end closing at the end of May. Okay. Number 3, the Overseas Committee Management Team may deny a request based on the request not benefiting the majority of the girls in the troop or because the proposed project or activity is not compliant with Girl Scout policy. Number 4, partial rollover funds may be granted with an explanation from the Overseas Committee Management Team. 5, the purpose of the rollover fund is for long-term planning. Should girls not implement their proposed activity or project by the deadline or their timeline, the Overseas Committee may transfer that rollover fund amount minus the typical troop startup fund back to the Overseas Committee. And number 6, all troop members must be listed and sign the application when it is turned in. Now, of course, we've talked about a lot of things. Well, let's discuss the OC budget. The annual budget will be written by the treasurer and the Overseas Committee chair and completed in a timely manner. And the budget must be approved by the OC team and documented in the Overseas Committee Management Team meeting minutes. Now, the initial budget will be approved by a majority of 51% from the Overseas Committee, and any changes to the annual budget must be approved by the Overseas Committee Management Team and documented in the Overseas Committee Management Team meeting minutes. The final approved budget needs to be submitted to your area lead advisor by September 15th. On the screen now is the Overseas Committee budget. You'll see where you fill out your information, what period it is from. So now we're in the 2014-2015 year. You'll have your cash on hand, troop funds, overseas committee income, expenses, and then you'll have your information at the bottom, such as your estimated year-end balance and approved on what day. And then again, you will submit this information with the packet of information your chair will be turning in by September 15th. As we go throughout our year, we are making sure everything is balanced so that we are ready for our audit at the end. The financial records are to be audited annually and is in charge by the treasurer or the overseas committee, and it should be done by a disinterested qualified third person. The audit will verify that financial statements are accurate and conduct a cash count on hand and test check outstanding bills owed and money due to the Overseas Committee. The person conducting the audit would furnish the Overseas Committee chair with a written report, and this report must clearly state if the audit is qualified or unqualified. A qualified audit would indicate that certain accounting irregularities have been identified and corrective measures are needed. An unqualified audit means that all financial matters of the Overseas Committee are in order. Now, there are filing requirements for the audit. One copy of the audit report will be left in the Overseas Committee records. One copy will be forwarded to the appropriate military approving authority if applicable. And then one copy will be forwarded to your area lead advisor. And audit reports and financial records will be retained for at least 2 years after the audit completion with the Overseas Committee, and these should be in your locked file. So on the screen now, you see the Overseas Committee year-end financial report that is completed. You'll see the front page is very similar to the budget. Cash on hand, it has your expenses, total expenses, true funds, and then where you end. On the back page is where it has the status of the fund statement. So as the Overseas Committee Treasurer, you will fill this information out. Those that are signers on the account will fill the piece out here where it says name and then Social Security numbers. It will have a signature from the chair, and then the auditor will have its statement. And any information that needs to be attached to the end of the year audit report, such as any additional information, printouts of your different line items, if there's a memorandum, all of that will be attached to this when you're turning it in at the end of the year. Now, we've talked about a lot of different things in regards to the treasurer, such as your ledger. We've talked about forms. Well, there's also a planning calendar. So right now, you'll see it begins in August, ends in June. Now, for some of our overseas committee, you may start earlier, and that's perfectly okay. Now, there are several different bullets for each of the months. You may have additional bullets that you will add to your planning calendar, such as when you'll have your troops turn in specific forms, due dates, as it will be. And you'll add that into your overseas committee calendar, but also in your planning calendar, so you'll know what should be upcoming for the next month. It's always nice as you have your planning calendar that if you have additional dates that due dates that must be done per your installation, that you list these and put them in your binder so the person that follows after you will have an idea of your planning for the year. Now, we have covered several different pieces of information. You have the guide that is in your Overseas Committee Management Team binder or on the Dropbox link that was given to you by your Overseas Committee Chair. If you have any question, remember your Overseas Committee Chair is there to ensure that you are successful, as well as you have a lead advisor for your area that you can contact too. Thank you for participating in our orientation. As always, we appreciate all the time and effort you put into creating a wonderful Girl Scout program in your local community. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.